Welcome to The Wonder, exploring perspectives, rituals, and observances of modern, naturalistic, earth-revering, pagan religious paths. Here are your hosts, Yucca and Mark.
Welcome back to The Wonder, Science-Based Paganism. I'm your host, Mark.
And I'm Yucca.
And it's that time again. We are here to talk about Hallows, or whatever you call the holiday that happens at the end of October, beginning of November.
Yep. Welcome back, everyone. I know that for a lot of people, this is a favorite holiday.
Absolutely. Yeah. We love the eerie season. We love the whole witchy aesthetic. Of course, we love that all year round, but we get to indulge it in public
Yeah, it seems like
for about a month.
Yeah. So, welcome. Yeah, I guess let's start with the name because, like so many of the other holidays on the Wheel of the Year, it can have a lot of different names. And
Yes.
those names can reflect subtle differences in what it means to people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that for me, the first thing on that, before we talk about names, is about this holiday is often a whole bunch of very different things all wrapped up into a ball.
Mm-hmm.
And what I prefer to do is to parse those out into separate observances,
Mm-hmm.
because, the sort of funny, goofy, spooky, sexy, Halloweeny kind of piece is not the same as the solemn contemplation of death piece,
Mm-hmm.
or the recognition of ancestry piece. There's a bunch of different things going on there, and I like to spread them out over a period of a week or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then I call those things different things.
Yeah. We do something very similar. For us, Halloween is it's a favorite holiday as well, and it kind of overlaps, but it is a different holiday. In the same way, later on in the year, when we get to solstice and Christmas, those are two separate things for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So when it comes to names, I refer to the religious holiday, which is the recognition of mortality, the mourning of those that have died, the working with ancestry, all that kind of stuff. I call that Hallows.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that for a particular reason. I mean, it's evocative of Halloween, but Halloween is much more of a secular and fun kind of holiday. It's more, I mean, it's very focused around children, and there's the whole trick-or-treating and candy thing, and decorating with all the spooky, witchy stuff, which is all really fun. But that's different than Hallows, and I choose the term Hallows because it doesn't have a cultural root. It's not an Irish word. It's not All Hallows Eve, which is a Catholic thing. It's just it's a thing. It's a station on the Wheel of the Year.
But it's still reminiscent of that, right?
Yes.
Right. It kind of speaks to it without really taking it directly from there.
That was the idea anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. That name has been growing on me. So I found myself starting to use that name, especially when speaking with other people about it, especially in the atheopagan community. It fits really nicely.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it certainly does for me. Because it's close enough to Halloween that people know what you're talking about, but it's different enough that they know that you're not talking about giving candy to costume children.
Yes. I'm just thinking about all the candy we're going to have to deal with. Tip for you other parents out there. We have actually this is since Halloween related, we have turned part of the tradition also into giving away candy. So because they get like a year's worth of candy, and we can't moderate. It's not like I'm gonna like give them one piece of candy a day. Like, no, if the candy's
Right.
enough, the candy's getting eaten. So we make it part of the tradition to sort through the candy the next day, pick the favorites, do like all the trading, and then we do reverse trick-or-treating. and we go and give candy to the neighbors who did not participate in Halloween because we live very rurally, so we have to drive into town to go to some place to trick or treat.
Uh-huh.
Take the candy and we like drop it off at the gates. So we drive like a couple miles down the road and drop some candy off for that neighbor and that neighbor. So we make giving the candy away part of the tradition as well. So just a hint out there for any of you.
That's
parents who are-
very clever, and I really like the reciprocity that's built into that. The idea that it's not just about getting, it's also about giving.
Right. And it's about, oh, who do you think? Who's gonna like the licorice better? Who's gonna like none of the chocolate gets given away. They're all about the chocolate. Who's gonna give this, who's gonna get the starburst? Who's gonna get the that, and so it becomes we started it young. I think it might be hard to convince like your 12-year-olds to do that, but if you start them at like 4 or 5, like it's easier to get in there. But
that's great. Yeah. Yep.
Anyways,
nicely done, parent.
I've often used, so it's second autumn for us or second fall as well. It's we've talked about this so much on the podcast before, but the seasons here, we don't have 4 seasons here. We have 2 seasons. We've got the cold and the hot time of year. But then if we are to split it into smaller seasons, it's really more like we have 8, because early fall and late fall are totally different seasons for us. They really are very, very different. So this holiday is like in the middle, kind of towards the end of second autumn for us, and then we'll tumble into winter very, very quickly after that. So, and I know for some people, for us, it's still kind of, we're not deep into winter by the time we get to solstice. It really depends on where you are in the world, but
sure.
And there's a few weeks in here that we have a few deciduous trees where it actually kind of looks like fall. But this time of year we've got chamisa, which I think in some other parts of the country might get called rabbit bush. English name for it. And they have these bright golden flowers that some people are very allergic to, so they're not really fond of when it's blooming. But this time and then we've got like the purple asters, and then by Hallows we're getting freezes now, but we'll start to get enough freezes that they're killed, right? Just like Hallows hits and like all the golden from the several weeks before is gone. So this very stark difference between the seasons.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's a similar impact of the time change, which always happens the first weekend in November. And that is the weekend when my ritual circle always meets to do our Hallows ritual. And of course, that Saturday night, the clocks go back an hour and suddenly, boom, it's dark. The sunset is an hour earlier and everything just seems a whole lot darker than it was before. So the advent of the season of darkness just seems to be suddenly like a gate dropping across the year. So it's a similar kind of thing with how you say that you get a freeze and then all that gold is just gone. Same kind of thing. So Hallows, and of course there are many in the pagan community that call the religious holiday Samhain, which is the Irish word for the month of November. I, for reasons that I've explained before, I choose not to use cultural words like that because I'm really clear that my atheopagan practice is a modern one. It's a modern invention. And I don't want to culturally appropriate. The only
because that is a specific cultural background.
Yes.
Plenty of people who it is, but that isn't yours in particular.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I don't feel particularly connected to any cultural lineage because my people have been in the US since the Mayflower, and all memory of any of that stuff from some old country somewhere is long lost. So I'm just a mongrel American. And I don't really think of American culture as being very cultural, if that makes sense. I mean, America definitely has a culture, but it doesn't feel like a very rich inheritance in terms of meaning, wisdom, accumulated knowledge,
Hmm. Yeah,
stuff like that,
certainly
if
is.
that makes sense.
Right. It certainly is a culture. It's a very
Oh yeah.
strong and influential culture, but the some of the things that, like the poetry and the mythology and those sorts of components of culture, don't seem to be as central in Pan American culture as they
Yes.
may be in many other, and of course not all, but many other cultures where they have a there's more of a focus on that connection and that deep poetic symbology part.
Yes. Yes. And we could spin off now onto a tangent about why American culture is so influential, which I think is because it's largely imperialistic.
Yes.
It's influential because it's designed that way. It's designed to gobble other cultures and to supplant them.
Mhm.
But that being said, let's talk about Hallows.
Yes.
Uh,
I also do want to mention in my area, Dia de los Muertos is a very big thing as
Here
well.
too.
Yeah. And there's the that's something that I don't directly participate in as much, but I really value it and love
Hmm.
the I love that it is happening here, even though that's not something that I'm really deeply involved in. The beautiful colors and the symbols and
Yeah,
the spirit of it is just, I really like it. I
me
just think
too.
so it's so great that I think this is such an important, the themes that we're talking about here are just so important, and I wish they were more integrated into our everyday awareness in life. But given that's not a reality, I think that it's good that we do have a time of year that we can recognize that
Hmm.
and put it in the forefront. Even if the companies always try and make it about buying sugar skulls and things like that instead of, the actual meaning.
Right.
Pretty good at
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think that there are some positive trends with the whole death positivity movement and the resurgence of interest in rituals that are not associated with, the big institutional religions.
Mhm.
I do think that there's a growing sense on the part of many people of the need for that,
Mhm.
and of the pathology of the traditional American denial of death, and phobia about it, fear of talking about it, fear of doing anything to prepare for it, all those kinds of pieces.
Mhm.
Which actually brings me to a thing that I do at this time of year, which I've talked about before, which is I revisit and revise my death packet every year. And we can put a link to the downloadable workbook that I have on my blog that you can fill out, which in basically it'll capture what your wishes are for while you're dying, what your health directives are, information about, what you'd like to be in your obituary, just kind of a general biographical thing so that people know, what to say, list of passwords that people will need in order to access your various digital accounts, which is very important because if people can't get into your accounts, then it becomes really difficult to do anything after you've died. And a will, of course, and a place for a farewell letter if you want to write one. So, this workbook is something that I have filled out myself, and it's a gift to the people who will survive me.
Mhm.
Because when people are mourning, they're in a fog, and the last thing they want to do is to have to deal with a ton of bureaucratic trivia in order to do what needs to be done in the wake of a person's death. So I really encourage people to do that. And the Hallows season is a great time to revisit that while sort of contemplating the fact that we're all going to die and we need to come to grips with that and be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that is a great resource. So thank you. Yeah, we'll put that in the links. And of course, one doesn't have to use that particular one, but you put a lot of work into getting all of thinking through that and compiling the different things that one might want to consider.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. There are several workbooks like this in various forms floating around, like the 5 questions relating to death is another one. All of them have good things in them, and none of them are complete.
Mm-hmm.
I found. Some of them were just missing certain important pieces. And so I stole from everybody to create something that felt comprehensive. And maybe I missed something. I hope not. But I think the workbook is a pretty useful system for pulling together all the information that people are going to need in the wake of your death. And of course, for your loved ones, that's a great kindness that you can give them.
Right. And thinking about death is something that can sometimes be uncomfortable, right? As living creatures, we, we're alive because we've worked really hard to stay that way, right?
Yep.
Every single one of us. And so there's an instinctual avoidance that we have of it because those who didn't have that instinct are not around anymore and didn't pass that on to this.
That's right.
But I think that it can be really empowering. It's something that I work into my practice every day. I tell myself every day that one day I will not be. I will die one day, and I don't know what day that is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
That could be before this podcast goes up, right? That could be 5 minutes from now. It could be 70 years from now, right? I don't know what that is, but knowing that, remembering that, not in a woe is me way, but it, I choose to frame it, and it is an effort because we have to really think about how we frame things, and sometimes we have to make an effort to readjust how we're looking at it. But I see that as a really empowering thing to go, wow, I have this moment. I have this day, right? I'm going to live this moment because I will not be, there's a time I will not be here. I didn't used to be for the past 14 or whatever billion years. And that's going to happen again. And so, wow, here I am, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As the Latins said, seize the fish.
Seize the fish, yes.
Carpe diem.
I like memento mori for it, right? Because there is this, seize the day in there. I think those two ideas are connected, right? But I like remembering my death because it makes me think about how I live. Thinking about my death makes me think about my life.
Yes.
And so there's a contemplative element to it, which I know that, again, I like carpe diem, but that has more of like a impulsive kind of feel. It has more like a YOLO feel to me than
I see.
than the memento mori. But whichever one works for people, right? And at a different point in my life, carpe diem might be more meaningful. But right now, every day I think about memento mori.
Me too.
Tattooed on my hand, actually. I literally have it on the back of my hand so that I see it every single day.
That's great. Yeah, I have an underworld altar that I light a candle on every day. And, the pictures of the people that have died are there, and the skulls and bones and all the reminders, all the symbols. And it's it's a reminder that, that's where I'm on my way to. And so but now, while I get to make choices about how I live, how do I want to do that? How do I, what do I want to leave behind, and how do I want to experience the moments while I'm here? I think I should put in a plug at this point, because I mentioned the death positive movement. And a lot of that is about just getting more comfortable with the fact of our mortality, and people have death cafes to talk about their relationship with their mortality and those kinds of, discussion venues. But also, that movement is very much about getting back to more natural disposition of our remains, which I really want to put in a word for, because the funeral industry puts hundreds of millions of gallons of formaldehyde into the ground every year, just in the United States, all in the name of people not wanting to imagine that their loved ones rot, when they will anyway.
It's even open casket funerals aren't even really that common anymore, are they?
No, they aren't. And
the body after the body is taken.
But even if you do it within the first couple of days, you don't need embalming. I mean, unless there's been
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so embalming is a really unnecessary and destructive step. And then when you add in the elaborate and insanely expensive caskets and grave liners and all that kind of stuff, families go bankrupt because someone died and wanted, all of the pomp and circumstance. And you can have, elaborate ritual around a very simple disposition of remains. My friend Tanya, she was just wrapped in a blanket and buried in the ground. And, she was a pagan and had pagan friends, and we really did a lot of grand opera around putting her in the ground. But it didn't involve the kind of expense and the kind of impact that would have come with a more traditional sort of funeral. So everybody's got different feelings about this, and I'm not telling anybody that theirs is wrong.
And
just
legal situations too, depending on what state and country you're in, for what is allowed and what isn't allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. To my knowledge, natural burial is legal throughout the United States anyway.
You have to get permits, though, in different areas.
Do you? We did not have to get a permit, other than just a disposition of human remains permit, which is required for any interment in a cemetery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
because they want to know where human remains are.
Right.
From a legal perspective, you need to know if somebody comes across remains that they're coming across somebody's burial, not somebody's murder or somebody,
Right. You can't bury someone in your backyard.
Yeah,
in most cases. You have to bury someone in a place that has been allocated for the disposition of bodies. And there are a lot of exceptions to that, actually. So, look at what the local laws are to determine, where you might be able to bury someone. But if you're burying in a cemetery, then you know that you're okay. Of course, now you have to pay for a plot.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have a concrete grave liner. You don't have to have an elaborate casket. And then, of course, there are the alternatives like aquamation, which is the water hydrolysis method, which is really cool, super cool. They use heated hydrogen peroxide to basically dissolve the body down to just a few scraps of bone. And that liquid is actually highly nutritious. It can be used on gardens. It can be used on, house plants, whatever. The liquid that comes off is neutral, is no longer caustic,
Reminds
And it,
me of
yes, there you go. Yeah, getting all the water out.
Dune.
And so that's a new way to go that is now legal in California and Washington. I'm not sure about other places.
I don't know the legality of it in different states, but I was seeing a few years back, a company doing like fungal wraps for the
Yes,
body, uh,
yes, I've
that
read about that.
pose the body. Yeah.
And then there's human composting,
Hmm.
which is literally just shoveling wood shavings over the top of a body and putting it into a
Just
capsule,
letting nature do what it does.
letting it sit. And what you get out of it is fantastic compost for agriculture or for a garden.
Mhm.
And, truly putting the body back into the cycle of life in a very, not a symbolic way, a
There you
genuine,
go.
genuine, real way, which is actually the way that I would like to go if at all possible.
Mhm.
If it's possible, I would like either human composting or aquamation,
Mm.
just depending on what's available in my local area and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
I love the idea of being rendered down into component pieces that can then be taken up by other organisms and used to assemble more life,
Mhm.
because that's what's going on here on planet Earth. That's what life is.
Right. And that's what all the parts in us are, right?
Hmm.
Every little bit in us used to be a little bit in somebody else and somebody else and somebody else before that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful to think about, in my opinion. I just find it marvelous, to think about all the different kinds of creatures and microorganisms and plants
Yeah.
that were a part, not just the ones that I've ingested, but the ones you know that are
Well, millions of years before that.
right, right.
The being, and then it was part of the soil, and then it was part of the plant, and then it was part of the animal, and then it was part of the fungus, and then it was in the soil, for
Yes,
millions upon millions of years. Uh,
right.
and not just the life, but also it, this was part of a mountain. This was
Yeah,
part of lava that came up through the crust, right? There's bits of my body that used to be at the bottom of the mantle. And of course, we
yeah,
go farther back before we were even a planet. We were a, you know, floating cloud of gas and dust, right? A star.
right.
And just, it's so cool to think about. We are part of the universe,
Yes.
right? We like to think about ourselves being in the universe, but we are part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah, we
we'll keep
we
being
are.
part of it. There won't be a yucca anymore. There won't be a mark anymore, but the stuff, the universe is still going to be the universe. It's just going to be a little bit different than it was before.
Right. Everything that we are is on loan.
Yeah.
It's not ours. It's just on loan.
Hmm.
And I think that's an important way to look at things, to understand that we have obligations, and the ultimate obligation that we have is to give ourselves back
Hmm.
after we're done using us.
Yeah.
And, in having these conversations and sitting with mortality, yes, I've got that organism impulse that says, don't kill me. I don't want to go. But the more I have these conversations, the more comfortable I get with, both philosophically and emotionally, with the idea that that's going to happen and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I'm having a pretty swell ride here, and I'm getting to put some things out into the world that I really care about, and that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. I can be good with that.
I'm really curious, very curious about what it's going to be like. Some people want to say they want to go peacefully in their sleep and not know it's happening. I want to know.
Yeah, me too.
right?
I mean, I don't want pain, but I
Yeah, I
want
don't
the
want to be in
transit.
pain, but I want to, which I don't know how one could really go without being in pain and well conscious, but because your body is shutting down, right?
Right,
But I don't want to be in excruciating, I don't want to be in agonizing pain,
right.
right? But
Well,
I
and there is that thing.
experience it.
There is that thing that they call death lucidity, or last minute lucidity, where people who have been unconscious for a long time, or kind of semi-conscious, or really
A
incapable.
bunch of activity happen right before.
Yeah, they'll kind of snap out of it, and they'll be communicative, and then they'll die.
Mhm.
And it's really mysterious why this takes place. I kind of wonder whether, because we don't observe it in other animals, to my knowledge.
Well, have we looked for it in other animals?
I think there's been some looking for it, but I'm sure there's a lot more research that could be done.
Seems like a
But
very difficult thing to get past an ethics board,
that's true. Yeah,
right?
no, you'd have to wait around for things to die. You couldn't kill them.
But yeah.
Yeah,
Well, unfortunately, if it's an invertebrate, you could. There's not
right,
protection
right.
on them, but they are so different than us that I don't know how meaningful that research would necessarily be, other than
Yeah,
to know whether, they. So I'm not suggesting that we do that at all, but in most countries, vertebrates have pretty strong ethical protection
hmm,
for research.
hmm.
Did you see this came out like maybe last year, but a researcher had recorded a spider, apparently a little spiderling apparently dreaming was the interpretation, that it seemed to be going through something that was looked very similar to what to REM in.
No, how on earth did they measure that?
They were looking at it was they were looking at the movement of its body in sleep. I'd have to go, I'll send it to you because I saved it. So, but it was
That
really
is
cute.
cool.
It was just this tiny little microscopic spiderling that they were looking at.
Wow.
Also thinking
Wow.
about invertebrate research, earlier this year, there was the bumblebees playing research.
Yes.
It was great.
Uh-huh.
Cute.
Saw
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
read that with some students recently that were studying. I was teaching them about how to read a scientific paper, and so we got to go through and like look at the validity of each of the experiments and stuff, and it was just
Uh-huh.
delightful to look through and talk about bumblebee brain development and all of that. And on the
Yeah.
other side, I was very pleased with that group, because they have a whole section about, there is no ethical protection for invertebrates, but we did it anyways, right?
Uh-huh.
We followed the rules that would be followed if it was a vertebrate, and it was like, okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Folks
that's good.
are genuinely curious about these creatures and care about them. So,
Yeah, that's good.
so
Yeah, I've read some research on honeybees, who we have lots of cultural associations with, about being industrious and workers and organized and all that kind of stuff. Apparently, most of what a honeybee does is stand around, eat honey, and goof off.
and
That,
hey, they snuggle. They
yeah,
snuggle with their sisters and play. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. They just, I
Having
mean, when
candy
there's
is not
when
so.
there's work to be done, when there's work to be done, well, you go, you do the work, but otherwise, you just eat honey and have a good time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's come back to Hollows for a minute.
Oh,
There,
yeah,
I just wanna.
that was quite a tangent.
That's great, though.
Yeah,
Anything else we should say? We should also say that we're several years into this podcast, and we've certainly talked about this holiday before. So let's put some links to previous episodes in the show notes. So I'll do that for all of you. So if you want to go back and binge the Hollows episodes, then we'll have those there for you.
yeah, that's great. So we haven't really talked about how we ritually celebrate this holiday
Mhm.
very much yet. I've described my ritual circle. I'm in a ritual circle called Dark Sun, and we were founded in 1991. And everybody who was there, all 6 of the people who were there originally, are still there, and we've added 3 more since.
Mhm.
So we started on Hallows, and we've done a Hallows ritual every year since, although we had to go virtual in 2020.
Mhm.
But now we're getting together in person again. And the short version of this is that we start in darkness and we talk about the feeling of being alive and what life feels like right now, and confronting the fact of our impending mortality. And then we physically travel, but I have a feeling, given our advancing age, soon this will turn into a guided meditation
Mhm. You're
to
one of the youngest members, is that right?
I am the youngest member. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm 61. So yes, we range from 61 to 87. Mostly in their late 60s, early 70s.
Mhm.
The and then we do a voyage to the land of the dead, to a very dark place in the forest, where we stop and we speak to the dead. We speak to those that have died over the course of the previous year, and to those that we're still mourning, and any that we still feel we have things to say to. And we spend a good long time down there until it starts feeling a little comfortable. And then it's time to come back before it gets too comfortable. And then we come back and we light a fire and we share wine and chocolate and sing and celebrate being alive. And it's a profound, a very simple but a profound experience every year.
Mhm.
Especially knowing that, eventually there's going to be a hole in the circle.
Mhm.
Eventually, one of us and then another will leave.
Mhm.
Uh, and it somehow there's something about the repetition of this over and over and over for so many years that helps me to somehow get a little bit more okay with that over time. That we prepared for this. We went through the motions a whole bunch of times,
Mhm.
preparatory to that loss.
Yeah.
How about you? What are any of the things that you do for Hallows?
So far we don't have a family tradition that we do yet, but I have a personal one that I do where and the exact date doesn't really matter to me, right? It's not like the moment of like the solstice where there's a moment. This is
Right.
just sort of a time of year, and I will go outside in the evening. It's still not quite the evening yet, and sit and watch the sunset. But I'll do it without, just in short sleeves, and sit in the plant matter that has browned, and you can feel that the crinkly dead plants around you, and just sit and watch the sunset, and without the shirt on, so it's cold, but just become comfortable with that discomfort. Because this time of year, it freezes every night this time of year. And so it gets cold, but it's not dangerously cold yet. I mean, if I was to
Mhm.
spend the whole night outside, it would be. But to just let myself really sit and just accept that discomfort and work on releasing, just letting go of things, just accepting the things that I need to accept that are just time to be let be gone, and let
Mhm.
them be part of my past, part of what made me, but not they're gone with the season, right? They're the dead material that will one day become something else, but I'm just going to accept it. And so I'll watch the sunset and, wait until the stars come out, and just in quiet silence, and then come back in. And so
Mhm.
try and do that every year, and it's chilly and spooky and kind of that spooky in that weirdly comforting kind of way.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's what I like to do for this holiday.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to what we do at midwinter at
Mhm.
the solstice. We sit outside for a while and let ourselves get good and cold, usually with a hot mug of something to
Mhm.
sip, but just feel the winter, feel the cold,
Yeah.
knowing that's really what's going on. And we're very good at creating little bubbles of comfortable environment for ourselves, but it's good to know what's going on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Yucca.
Thank you.
And a happy and meaningful and profound Hallows to all of our listeners, however you celebrate it. I hope it's a really good one for you, a really good turning of the wheel this season.
Yep. Thanks for being here with us, everyone.
See you next week.